the excretory system today. This is Science 8. So excretory system is basically how our body gets rid of waste materials. So we'll be looking specifically at the urinary system, but we will also touch on the skin as well as being part of the excretory system as well. So the body produces different types of waste. These waste materials can become poisonous in the body, and then they can cause harm if they're not being removed. So when we talk about excretion, that is a waste removal. The excretory system removes chemical and gaseous wastes from the body. And excretory system, it involves organs from other bodily systems. The key organs, though, in this system are the 2 kidneys. I'm just going to pause it. Okay, so let's take a look next at the excretory system and some of the waste products. So when we were looking at the respiratory system, we talked about carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a waste product, and it gets removed from the blood by the lungs during gas exchange. So recall how the capillaries were wrapped around the alveolus, gas exchange would occur, and then we would exhale out our carbon dioxide. Another waste product is ammonia. It's a very toxic compound that gets produced in our bodies when we break down proteins. Other chemical processes that happen in our cells also produce water and salts, which are also waste products. We do need water, but we don't need extra more than what we need. So some water is always needs to be expelled as well. All right, the liver has an important function in excretion as well. So recall, we talked about the liver when we were looking at the digestive system. So it is an organ of the digestive system, but it also plays a role in excretion. So what the liver does is it takes that toxic ammonia that was produced when we break down proteins, and it's going to convert it into a less harmful substance called urea. And this urea, it's less harmful, but it still has to be disposed of. So it still has to be excreted out of the body. Okay, so once that urea is produced, the liver releases it into the bloodstream, and then it needs to be excreted out of the bloodstream. And that's where the kidneys come into play. All right, so here we've got the 2 kidneys in this diagram. They're about 10 centimeters long. Their main function is excretion. So what kidneys do is they filter the blood, and they're going to strain out any of that unwanted waste material such as the urea, salts, as well as excess water. All right, once that is done, urine gets produced, and that urine, which is produced in the kidneys, will flow through these 2 tubes here. They are called the ureters, and then from the ureters, they go to the urinary bladder. The bladder will collect the urine, and then the urine gets passed out of another tube called the urethra, which I will show in the next slide. So about 180 liters of blood passes through the kidneys each day, but only about 1.5 liters of urine is actually produced. Most of that blood that's passing through the kidneys returns back to the body. The amount of urine that's produced also depends on how much water you drink that day. All right, so a function of the kidneys is to make sure that there's the proper amount of water in your blood. If there's too much water, then the kidneys will excrete that excess water and produce a lot of urine. All right, so this diagram is showing the kidney cross-section. So taken one kidney, sliced it in half, and we can see the inside of the kidney. So what happens is we have blood entering the kidney by this red renal artery. It's going to branch off into capillaries. They're going to enter this structure inside a kidney. It's called a nephron. And there's millions and millions of these nephrons throughout the kidney. If you look through here, this area here of the kidney, it's got millions of nephrons. And these nephrons, basically their function is to remove the waste from the blood and produce the urine. The filtered blood will return back to the body through the blue renal vein. And then the urine will flow out of the nephron and attach and go through this ureter. The ureter is attached to the kidney. So right here, you can see the ureter. Next. Here we can see clearly, we can see the two kidneys. We can see the two ureters coming off of the kidneys. And they go to the bladder. That's where urine gets collected. And then there's another tube at the bottom called the urethra. And that's how we urinate and expel the urine. All right, so don't confuse the two ureters with the urethra. The ureters are the ones attached from the kidneys to the bladder. The urethra is the tube from the bladder to the outside. So urine enters the bladder expands, a signal will be sent to your brain that the bladder is full and that you need to go to the bathroom. The bladder can store about 1 liter of urine. And then when the bladder gets full, muscles contract, which will push the urine out through that tube at the bottom, the urethra. Okay, so the skin is also part of the excretory system. So think about sweat. So skin, it's got thousands of sweat glands just below the surface, and sweat gets produced to keep us cool, but it also removes excess salt from the blood. So if you've ever tasted sweat on under your nose there or above your lip, it's very salty. That salt is added to sweat. So when you're sweating, you are excreting salt as well. Urine can be tested, and you may have done urine tests before where a doctor or you go to the lab and they collect urine samples. So urine testing can reveal diseases. So for example, if they find protein in the urine, that can mean that the kidneys are failing and they're not filtering blood properly. So there should not be proteins found in your urine. Another important chemical that can be found in the urine is glucose, which is a sugar. And if that is found in the urine, that can mean that a person has diabetes. So basically what's happening is the cells can't absorb all that glucose that's in the blood. So glucose is building up in the bloodstream. And because the blood has so much glucose, the nephrons just filter it out and they add it to the urine. So when you urinate and it gets tested, and they can find glucose in there, and that would be an indication of diabetes. Back in back in the olden days when they didn't have the tests, doctors would actually taste people's urine to see if it was sweet, and yeah, ew, and it would indicate that that person had diabetes. Yeah, no tests available back then, or they hadn't discovered how to make those tests yet. Next, we're just going to talk about dialysis. So sometimes kidneys can fail, or sometimes maybe they're damaged. Maybe somebody gets into a car accident and they've severely damaged their kidneys and the kidneys don't work anymore. Kidneys are very, very important because they're filtering your blood. They're taking all that waste material out of the blood. So if kidneys fail, there is a dialysis machine that can act as a kidney. And you can see in this diagram, we have a person here connected to this machine. The blood is going into this machine and getting filtered. All right, so this machine will then remove all the wastes from the blood, just like a kidney normally would. The blood flows into that tubing, goes into the machine, and that tubing is made of a special material called selectively permeable material. So like we talked about before when we were looking at like diffusion, osmosis, selectively permeable means certain things are allowed to diffuse and certain things will not. That tubing is then also surrounded by a fluid. So waste from the blood will diffuse out of the blood and go into the fluid. And then certain substances from the fluid are allowed to diffuse into the blood. That blood then, once it is cleaned and filtered, it will flow back into the person. So this procedure takes about 4 to 6 hours to fully clean the blood, and then a person would have to do this about 3 times a week. Whereas the kidneys we have would continuously just filter blood continuously. This dialysis method, the person would have to come in to the hospital or wherever 3 times a week and then sit there for about 4 to 6 hours to get that done. There are new devices as well that are made as well, where it's connected to the abdomen area, so the person can still move around while the blood is being filtered. All right, there's a couple videos here that we can watch. So I'm just going to pause the video here, or pause the recording.